One of the things I didn't mention about the real benefit of having really national, international experts here in our backyard in Raleigh at NC State University is what we get when we get the professors is real research-based information. This isn't what people are guessing about. This isn't what they think works, which is what you get a lot of other times, is what feels right to people, what seems like common sense. What we get is real research-based information, and you know, that first talk I heard more valuable information and practical information than I've gotten out of you know, a half dozen other talks that I've heard. So we're going to continue with that. Our next speaker is Dr. Barb Fair, who started either within 3 or 4 months before or after I did. I'm not quite sure what she is doing because I am getting gray hair or worse, and she's got more energy and is doing more now than she did those few years ago when we started. But Barb is very active with the Urban Forest Council. I mentioned it before. There's a great booklet that's over there on our table that's free. Right there, Barb is showing this off for you. That comes from the Urban Forestry Council, but was written by Dr. Fair. It is fantastic. I hadn't seen it, and I went through it, and it is a great piece of literature there. So hope you will get that. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Barb because I'm really excited about what she has to say and what she's going to talk about in terms of planting for success. You can see this is all about being successful in the landscape. So without further ado, thank you, Dr. Fair.
Thanks, Mark. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep. All right, great. Yeah, the nice thing about that booklet is it talks about planting as well as irrigation and pruning, a little bit about fertility. So it gets you kind of through the beginning parts of the life of your plants in the landscape. Obviously, because it's the Urban Forestry Council, it focuses on trees. And I am going to focus my discussion today on woody plants in particular, and you can see some stuff on the table that we're hopefully going to demo at some point in time. So I'm really happy that Mark mentioned this idea of research. How many of you guys are aware of the extension program at NC State? All right, enough of you, but not enough of you. Everybody should raise their hand. You have county extension people, and I know there's somebody in the audience, Minda, from where are you, girl?
County,
there you go. Any other county extension agents? Not here today, but those people are your go-to people in your county. They can get to us, the state extension specialists, and as Mark said, we don't just willy-nilly, you know, throw our ideas out there, right? They're based on sound research that's been done not just by NC State, but across the country and the world, as a matter of fact. So we provide that. Now, there's certainly anecdotal stuff that goes along with that, but that research base is what we really focus on. So without any further ado, I'm going to talk about planting trees, right? So I want to remind you of the benefits of plants, right? We don't just stick them in the landscape solely because they're pretty. Pretty is good, but pretty doesn't pay the bills. Well, unless you're a model, I guess. That would pay the bills. But needless to say, some of us aren't pretty enough to pay the bills with that. So we plant plants in the landscape because they perform certain functions. And trees are the workhorse in the landscape. They provide the most benefit to the landscape. Functionality is really important. So the bigger a plant can get, healthy, a big healthy plant is going to provide much better benefits than a smaller, kind of scraggly, not doing so well plant, right? So here's a plant in a typical urban environment. This is an oak. Is it doing okay? Yeah. Is it growing in soil? You guys all know the answer to that now, right? Yeah, there ain't no soil there, as Dr. Fontenot said. That is an urban, they had to reclassify them, right, and call them urban soils because there's no other way to explain what that stuff is that we're sticking them in. Plus, look how small the site is that we're putting them in. So just thinking about all the benefits plants provide. How many of you are familiar with a little thing called the tree benefits calculator? Nobody? A couple. Go online and Google that. Use the Google to your benefit. It's tree benefits calculator. And it will tell you how much trees are actually worth money-wise, right? Because money talks. So it comes up with this little cool pie chart, and on that pie chart, it kind of breaks things down as to which is the most valuable. Which of those up there do you think is actually the most valuable? Stormwater benefits, carbon sequestration, or mitigation of urban temperatures? They're not equal. Stormwater runoff. That is the biggest benefit that plants provide. So think about a larger canopy gathering more water, slowing more water down, moving it through that canopy. That's a lot of big bucks, because that water then is not necessarily going into our into our stormwater resources, right? Into our pipes. So the whole idea of plants is infiltrating water into the soil rather than having it run off. So that's where you get your most bang for the buck. So if you plant a tree incorrectly, does it matter? Well, obviously, as a tree person, yes, I think it does. Have I planted some trees incorrectly in my life? Of course not. No, I never do anything wrong. Ted's going to talk later about pruning. Have I ever made a bad pruning cut in my life as a certified arborist? Of course I have. Have I cut myself? Of course I have. But, you know, those are things where it's all a big learning process, right, and doing things the right way. And if you get nothing out of everything I say today, remember this. Woody plants are incredibly resilient. They will survive no matter what the heck we do to them, in many cases. Why do you think we keep pruning improperly? Not we, anybody in this room, all those other silly people outside there, right? Why? Because the plants don't die. We plant them incorrectly. Do they die? Not right away. So by the time they croak 5 years or down the road, we don't remember that that's why they might have died. Maybe it wasn't good soil, number one, but maybe we planted it incorrectly. I have a lot of pictures of planting things incorrectly. Do I have a lot of pictures of planting them correctly? Sadly, not as many. Right, so keep in mind that one thing as you go kind of through what you're thinking about. You know, everybody, bigger is better, right? How big a plant should you put in the ground? Tree-wise. Some people want immediate impact, so they're putting 4.5 or 5-inch caliper trees in the ground. How long does it take for them to establish? I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But then think about how long it takes them to die, because they store a lot of energy in that wood. So it takes a long time for a plant to actually die. Is the guarantee period over by then? Oh, heck yes. Yeah, they're always going to survive past your guarantee period. All right? So this isn't the best focused picture, because this is old technology, you know, where we made slides. Some of you young people may not know what that is. I haven't been around NC State as long as Bill, but I'm pretty darn old. Right? I worked out in the industry for many, many years before I went back and got a Ph.D. So what do y'all notice here? Anybody notice this? What do you think happened? They died. Why do you think they died? The wrong place, right? In the wrong species. This happens to be white pine. We don't grow them a lot here in the Piedmont, maybe in the mountains a little bit, but certainly up north where I came from, they tried to grow white pine everywhere. White pine is super sensitive to road salts. Look how close it is to that road. Not that close, but I don't know if you guys know, but spray goes a long way. If you've ever been to the coast and see how much salt spray comes inland, it is amazing how plants are affected. So they planted these white pine here. So they said, oh crap, they all croaked. So what did they do? They planted a whole nother row, just a couple feet back. Notice what's happening to them. Sometimes we're a little slow to learn things, right? So hopefully, those are all dead now and they're going to plant something else. Do we think about stuff above and below and beside when we plant things? Not always. I see this far too often. This is not solely the fault of the utility company. We all want to blame them, that they're all in there doing bad pruning. That is not accurate. The utility company's job is to deliver electricity to your home as safely as possible. What do you think most electric outages are due to? Sadly, our little friends, the trees, right? Most of it is because we put a tree in the wrong place or it wasn't maintained well. So their job is to deliver electricity, but they have gotten much better in how they prune. But there needs to be a big space around those utility lines, and now it's like 30 feet. So sometimes they come in, and maybe they don't do this as well as they could, let you know that they're going to prune. because when they come in and they take half of your tree off, it's kind of shocking, right? So we need to be better about where we put them and how we put them. Those, to me, again, they're alive, but are they functioning? Not very well. To me, that is what we call a class 5 pruning. I don't know if Ted will talk about that. You get your chainsaw and you cut it right down at the ground. Yeah, that's kind of silly. But needless to say, so we're talking about what kind of planting stock do we put in. There's 3 kind of main categories of planting stock we're going to look for. And in North Carolina, we are blessed with a huge nursery industry. The folks are producing very good quality plant material in general. But certainly I'm going to talk about what do you want to look for when you actually select a plant before you plant it. So I want you to keep in mind, a B&B plant, guess how much of that root system comes with you into that B&B ball when you put it in your yard? No, about 20%. So most of the root system is actually still in the field, even if they do root pruning. And they do root pruning with this cool tree spade, okay? So they're transported in these baskets, right, with burlap around them. Are they lightweight? How heavy did Bill say soil is? Pretty darn heavy, right? So a B&B plant is very heavy, all right? That's why you have to think about how do you get it to your location. I've seen people do crazy stuff, putting big old B&B trees in the trunk of their Honda. And you say, oh, did you know you're going to have to get that back out of there? Anybody ever tried to bend like this and this like this? No, it doesn't work so well for your body, right? So big, heavy plants. When can you plant them? In the South. What do you think? You can plant them in fall. You can plant them in spring. Now keep in mind, as our climate is changing, how long is fall? I don't know, end of December? Is the soil still warm? Could you still plant? Probably, right? I've planted trees in the middle of December, and they've been quite successful. So it's just a matter of understanding the limitations of whatever plant type stock you might be buying. Now, the container-grown plants, as you're going to see, they have 100% of their roots. There was a guy that there was a landscape architect from Maryland. He was invited to do a big talk for our Nursery and Landscape Association and Urban Forestry Group. And he stood up there in front of all those people and said, never use container-grown plants in the landscape. And I'm like, dude, you may not be leaving here alive. Because the industry guys are like, excuse me, that would be my bread and butter, buddy, you're talking about. But you get what he's saying when you actually look at some of the things I'm going to show you here. His whole deal is you get garland roots with these plants. It's true. It's because we're producing them in containers. But the goal is to get them in that container, get them to size, and sell them before too much of that happens. So I'm going to show you actually how we deal with that if you do get a plant that got circling roots or trunk girdling roots or whatever. So they're easy, they're lightweight, right? Because are they grown in soil? No, they're grown in pine bark typically here in the South. Maybe a little sand in some cases, it just depends on the mix. And Dr. Fontenot's group is looking at using wood chips to grow them in instead. So when can you plant those guys? People would tell you all year round. And I'm going to tell you personally in the South, I want to see us, especially on large commercial scales, not planting things in the summer. We have to stop doing that. Doesn't matter how well you irrigate. But we do a lot of stuff, and it's complicated, but that has been our mission, the Urban Forestry Council and the Landscape Contractors Association. We've got to stop planting from late June into August. It is too hot and too dry. Now, if you can maintain irrigation in your landscape, that's great. But on commercial sites, you see too much failure of plants in that situation. So that's our general recommendation. But you can essentially do it anytime you want. So bare rootstock, you get 100% of your root system. That doesn't mean it's a lot, right? But that's kind of what some of them can look like. It just depends. You're going to dig a very different hole. Honestly, this is a terrible picture, but it gives you the idea of how do you decide how deep the hole should be and so forth. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Now these are grown when? When can you plant these? These are a little trickier, yeah, only when they're dormant. And the thing is, you might not have very many species available to you to do as bare root. Oftentimes you're buying them online, right? Fruit trees is this one way that they sell fruit trees a lot. A guy up in Durham, I'm having a brain fart, Alex Johnson, he's their city forester. He does a lot of bare root plants. Because you're not shipping dirt all over creation, right? they're light, they're easy to deal with. But you have to make sure you don't let the roots dry out. So really important. So every type of planting stock has its limitations and its benefits. So just thinking about that and keeping in mind. Most likely you guys are probably going to be dealing with container grown plants. And so I'm going to show you that. So a lot of people call this a park grade tree. A lot of people say, when you get something for free, just go ahead and take it. I'm going to tell you, no, don't do that. Just because it's a free lunch doesn't mean it's going to be tasty. So a couple things, this is bad right here. We're not going to talk about this till a little bit later. But this is a maple. This should have one main stem. How many dominant stems does this thing have? 4. Could you fix it? Ted probably could. I could. Do I want to? I'm not buying a plant that crappy. No, I'm investing some money in this plant. Probably a couple $100. I'm not going to buy one that isn't of high quality. So when you're looking for it, and red maples are what? Shade trees, right? So we want to get a good quality shade tree. It shouldn't be multi-stem. So we're looking for this beautiful shape right here, a single main leader with lateral branches coming off of it, not 20 million upright leaders. Because in time, that will not be building good structure. And hopefully I've helped lay the way for Ted to talk later about pruning. So a couple of common issues, right? Most of you would probably tell me what is wrong with this picture. What would you tell me? Yeah, this is, I'm going to call this the mismulching of America. We do this everywhere. Not, again, nobody in this room.
Is that the Department of Transportation that's planning these?
The young lady in the front said, is that the Department of Transportation planning these? So we're already trying to get somebody to blame. I'm teasing you. It's always good to blame somebody other than yourself, right? No, and I'm not going to tell you where that is. I've been sworn to secrecy. Needless to say, this is not a columnar cultivar of red oak. This is a tree that is under stress because it was planted and mulched incorrectly. In this case, these plants are above grade about a foot. This is too high above grade. We're talking a couple inches, not 12, 2, right? That's a big difference, okay? So it's got the right amount of mulch in both cases, but the root ball is right under there. So this happens to also be a red maple. Red maple are also called swamp maple. They like it wet. We put them in the worst places in the world. We put them in parking lots, really dry, hot places. They don't dig it. So they will croak if you do not give them good water. So where's the water going to go here? Not going to go in that root ball, right? It's going to go right off of the top of it. Because you get a 2-inch gully washer, right? It's coming fast, it's coming down hard. It is not going into that root ball. Then we have the issue of planted too deep. This seemed to be the biggest issue for the longest period of time, right? And you can see where we've got these issues. I'm going to show you a really nice little stem here of a tree that was planted incorrectly. It was planted too deep, right? This was a B&B plant, so it didn't have very many roots to start with, but it was up to about here in the ground. Not too bad in this case, but then guess what else added insult to injury? Not mulch in this case, they overwatered it. When I got out of the car to go see what was going on, we were called to this, and this happened to be a DOT site. We were called to that site because over 200 trees were dying. Dr. Neal and I went because they thought maybe it was a herbicide thing. No. You step out of the car and your foot goes 4 inches into mushy water. You're like, could this be a factor? And indeed it was. They were overwatering the site. They were irrigating along with watering, and they were irrigating without a rain sensor. A rain sensor shuts your irrigation system off so you're not watering in the rain. So that's how deep that particular plant was. We'll talk about those roots in a minute. I see this too often in commercial settings. Otherwise I wouldn't have pictures of these things, right? That's seatbelt strapping. They use that a lot now for kind of tying those wire baskets together when they're delivering B&B. You see this as well, the burlap. Should we take the burlap off the top? Absolutely. Even if it is biodegradable, that burlap is going to wick moisture out of that root ball. Do we need to cut the wire baskets back or take the wire baskets off? I'm going to tell you that there's some folks out there that say, yes, take the entire wire basket off. I will tell you, I do not agree with that. And the reason for that is, you've got a really big plant. How do you get it in the hole if you've taken the wire basket off? What happens if it's a sandy root ball, which you will get from Johnston County? They have sandy soil there. If you take that wire basket off, the likelihood of that falling apart is greatly increased. So you're trying to keep the integrity of that B&B root ball together. So taking that entire wire basket off is a problem. My recommendation is take the top third to 1/2 off. So you'll see pictures of me sitting in a hole, or kind of sitting on the edge of the hole. If I could sit on the edge of that hole and put my feet in there and work that root ball, I know that's the right size hole. Because I can get in there then and cut the top of that wire basket off, and I can take the burlap down. You can take all that stuff out of the hole if you want, or you can stick it in there. Some people go crazy about sticking stuff in the hole, and that's fine. It's not going to matter either way. I don't usually keep the wire in there, but the burlap doesn't matter as long as you pulled it away from the top. Right? A lot of times you'll see a bunch of twine around the top. Now, that can't stay there either, even if it's natural twine. I've seen that girdle trees quite quickly. So how do we handle these beautiful, beautiful root balls? I can have the lights, yeah? Will this work for me? So I did a little study, a research project not too many years ago, with container-grown plants. Both of these are container-grown plants. Many of you are probably looking at this one and saying, that's awesome. It's got a lot of roots. And you're welcome to come and lift these up afterwards, right? So 3 treatments. One, we did nothing to these. These came out of 15-gallon containers. So we did nothing to one of the treatments. The second treatment was we beat the heck out of it, which is really good if you want to let out your anxieties. I'm going to show you how to do that. And you can do that to roots, and they're going to be like, what else you got? Yeah. So the third one was we sliced them. And that's what I'm showing in this picture. We shaved the outside of those root balls. I promised Mark I would protect his new carpet. So I'm going to try to keep this on my beautiful tarp. This is a container-grown plant. Notice what I've already done to it. And you're welcome to come up and look afterwards. I shaved about 1 inch or so off of the side of that root ball. How did I do that? With hard, vigorous labor. I didn't want to do it for you guys because I would probably get out of breath and then I'd be yeah, passing out. It is hard work. You take a spade. It's good to sharpen these as well too, and you can do it on a grinder. A rounded one or a flat-edged one, this is the best tool to use to make that happen. You shave the outside 1 to 2 inches off the side of that root ball. It depends on the size of the root ball itself. The bottom of the root ball. Step 1. Then, let's go to step 2.
While it's still in the pot.
No, not while it's still in the pot. You could try that. You have to obviously be very careful of where your feet are located at any one time when you're doing this, especially if you're doing it with a partner who doesn't care where your feet are. So you're going to go in, yeah, take it out of the root ball. You can do it when it's in the hole, as Dr. Ed Gilman from the University of Florida is showing you there, because you kind of put some soil around it to help stabilize it, or you can do it beforehand. But you have to make sure your hole is the right depth before you do that. Okay? So to the treatments, right? We did these 3 treatments. These are just examples of 2 of them. This one was shaved. Now, yeah, there's still a few girdling roots, but there are no trunk girdling roots down there. That's the key. There are no circling roots out here that are going to move around there. When you notice, you see the paint here. That was the original root system. So what happened is, with these, where did the roots go? Where do you guys? They went where? Right? Out. That's where we want them to go, right? We don't want them to go round and round or down. We want them to go out, right? Because the depth of a typical tree, any tree here, other than longleaf pine is one of the only species in North Carolina that has a taproot. Even large mature oaks, the depth of their root system is 18 inches to 3 feet deep. They go out sideways. They start out with the taproot when they're young, and quickly that is lost. So the whole key is getting roots to go sideways. What's happening in this root ball? Everything is in that container, that original container. So that's why it's so heavy. Those roots went nowhere out of that root ball. So it showed a difference in how they grew and how well they would establish in the long term. So it was a pretty cool research study. So is this our light? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're welcome to look at those, try to lift them up and see what's happening. See, there's my hole. So there's a couple of things you can use. We need to determine how deep the plant should be in the hole, right? And everybody says, well, you know, just make sure it's 2 to 3 inches above grade, the root flare. I'm going to tell you that's not really good enough. We need to know, what does the root flare really mean? What is that all about? And I'm going to show you in a second. Notice what happened to this root ball. This was a demo I did, I think it was in Fayetteville. And I came and I saw the hole that these guys dug, and it was pretty small and the sides were straight down. And I'm like, sorry guys, you're going to have to dig some more. So they disliked me right off the bat. I narrowed down the picture so you couldn't see all of the angry faces. Dr. Fontenot was there. He might remember. Everybody's like, dang. Because then I made them hammer stakes in the ground. It was not fun. But what I want you to notice is I am looking for what we call the first main order root. That means, what is that first root that comes off that trunk? Because that's what needs to be planted just below grade. So right at the soil surface. All right? Not too deep, not too high. That tells you where that happens. I'm going to show you a nifty tool that you can use to determine that. So in this case, you could use a screwdriver. Everybody's got a screwdriver, right? I use these old survey pins that used to be around a long time ago. They're red and white. They have a little hoop on top. You can buy them from Ann Leonard or Ben Meadows, Catalogs, whatever. And essentially what you're doing is you're taking that and you're shoving that down into that root ball. You can do it with container grown plants as well. Shoving that down in that root ball to find out where that root is located. If you're digging in 6 inches, I don't want that tree before you get to that root ball. It should be no deeper than a couple of inches. So notice in this case, where did I find it? And I did this before I knew how deep to make the hole. You can do it outside. It's much easier than before you put it in, and then you have to try to jiggle it around to get it to the right depth. So notice how some of that root ball has to come off. So once you figure out where that first main order root is, it's hard to say, then you're going to take the top of that soil off of that root ball. Even if there's a little bit of roots in there, it's not the end of the world. It is more important to get it to the right depth. Does everybody get that, where I'm going with that? All right? So you're digging in there, you're searching, you're going all the way around that trunk to find out where that first main order root is. Right? Some people do this, that's cool. You know how big you want to make your hole. How big should your hole be? Yeah, 2 to 3 times as wide as the root ball itself, unless you've done good site prep. If you've created a whole bed and you've tilled it like Dr. Fontenot told you to, then you probably don't need to dig it that big. I always do because it's just how I am. I'm kind of anal about these things. So you can stand in the tree and somebody could bury you in there, you're good to go. See that face right there? Those people really want to be there learning about tree planting, don't they? God love him though, but this poor guy, I made him dig a lot. So that's a pretty good sized hole. It was a pretty good sized tree. This gives you an example of where that first main order root is. Now this tree's been in the ground a little bit, but it really illustrates what you're looking for. See what that is? So that's a little deep in that landscape. All right? How they did that is they used a tool called an air spade. I understand Leaf and Limb uses an air spade. An air spade is essentially this tool. It's like this long. It's like a gun. How many of you ever had a tree company come and do an air spading for you? Nobody yet. Someday you will. Right? It's like a gun. And it is attached to one of those really big compressors that you drag behind your vehicle. So it delivers about 120 pounds per square inch of air. And you can transplant trees with it. It does not damage roots. You can excavate the collar of a tree to see how deep it is planted. Are there girdling roots there that you can see and potentially remove? So it's a really cool tool. And if you have a really compacted site, it is a really cool way they can do what they call radial trenching and blowing radial trenches out from that big tree to help mitigate compaction. You want to plant something underneath the tree? It's hard, right? If you have to dig it with a shovel, you don't know what root you're going to hit or whatever. So they use air spades now too to incorporate organic matter and or topsoil in and around the root system of a tree. If you need to elevate soil a little bit because you have roots at the surface of mature trees, that is a really cool tool to use to do that. So really awesome tool. You're going to see it a lot more in the trade. They do it too if you have utility lines and you have really important trees nearby so you're not killing roots. So I've transplanted a number of trees with that with my students. And there's one right out in front of Kilgore Hall, a Japanese maple. It was an amazing, amazing tree and did quite well. So there's the size of your hole, right? This is just a general example. One thing I really do, sorry, because I probably moved this right in front of everybody. One thing I really do want you to focus on is the mulch. Where it shows the mulch. It's at the edge of the root ball out. It is not on top of the root ball. I want to talk about that in a little bit more. So, remember I said research-based information. The sloping sides of the hole are important. It allows the roots to go laterally, like I told you we need them to do, right? It helps get water to that root ball that you want it to get to. All right? Important. 2 to 3 times it gets, again, roots growing where you want them to grow and how you want them to grow. So Dr. Fontenot talked a lot about, preparing soil, not compacting soil. I don't know why people do this. Because it makes them feel good? I don't know. I have actually seen people go out with a compactor. I mean a machine compactor. We are going to make sure there is no air pockets in this thing if it kills us. And it will not kill them, it will kill the tree. I think people are afraid there's going to be an air pocket the size of their head in there, and it's like you can't have any air pockets. You need to have air pockets. That's where air is. Roots need air. That's where water moves. That's where roots move. That's why you need air pockets in that soil system. They're incredibly important, right? So doing this isn't too deep, right? You guys saw that already, right? Now we're going to jump in there and we're going to step on it and make sure it doesn't go anywhere, right? Then we're going to come in here and we're going to firm that soil up. Firm it up. I don't know what that means. That is wrong. You do not need to firm the soil up like that. Guess what? You can use that really cool thing you call a shovel. And you can take that soil and chop it down into that hole and mitigate enough of those air pockets so you're not going to have an issue. And then you're going to irrigate it, right? And then if you need to add a little bit more soil, you add a little bit more soil. But you don't need to use it with your foot or with the end of your shovel, but with the pointy part of your shovel. That's the way to do it, not this, right? So here it is, the mismulching of America, right? Now in the woods, you see leaf material and stuff all around trees, right? It doesn't cause them any problems. This is not the same as leaf material. This is triple shredded hardwood bark mulch, right? So Dr. Fontenot talked about mulching, and he said you add some every year. And I'm going to put a caveat on that. You add some every year if you need to add some every year. In these sort of circumstances, not when you're talking about necessarily building soil, but when you are mulching around woody plants. By the way, this is mulch. That tree is only 6 feet tall, so we have mulched a third of it. Maybe we have extra mulch. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, and I don't know why we keep doing it. It's like one of those things we talk about. So how much, no more than how many inches of hardwood mulch should be on woody plants? What depth? 2 to 3 inches, maybe 4. You could get away with 6 if it's pine straw, because that's light and fluffy, right? You do tend to not want to put it up against the trunk for this reason. Now, triple shredded is the most commonly used out there, and people always ask me, what's your favorite mulch? And I'm like, whatever works, doesn't matter to me. I personally prefer the wood chips with some leaf compost added to them, which is essentially what you're getting from an arborist, right? I like them to be decomposed a little bit, but that's not necessarily critical. But that allows you some stuff that's breaking down fast, and then some that's breaking down slower later, and build soil just like Dr. Fontenot was saying. But most of the time when you see landscapers doing it, they have 3 inches on there, and then they add 3 more inches, and then they add 3 more inches every year until you have now 9 inches. That is too deep, right? And the problem with triple shredded is notice what's happening on the top of that. It's crusty. Where's water going to go? Not infiltrated in there. Remember, mulch is hydrophobic. It doesn't like water. So it has to get wet first before it'll allow water to merely move into it and be held in there. So when you have that crusty stuff, and how many times do you ever go out into your own yard with triple shredded and you try to dig your hands in it? It is not easy. So if you have enough mulch, fluff it up. You don't need to add any more necessarily. Or a very light top dressing over top of it. Use compost. There's many different ways to do it, as Dr. Fontenot mentioned. So with pine straw, you can be up to that 6 inches and still be okay. But really, you want to be around 4. How about herbaceous plants? How deep? Yeah, right on, 1 inch. All right. And using good quality products. So this is good. We don't have very much on the top of the root ball. Why do you think they recommend that now? Not putting stuff right on top of the root ball. Right, it's all about allowing water and oxygen to move in and out of there freely. And so they just found that it's best to put it on the edge of the root ball and out from the hole. Right? Well, mulch is really important. It does control weeds, seriously, very well. It does hold moisture into the soil. It does mitigate the temperatures in the soil. Right? But then you get those weeds in there and you get your string trimmer and you're like, I'm going to get every last one of these weeds if it kills me. Right? And sometimes it does not help to do this. Right? We bang the side of the tree. And that is damage that will affect the life of that tree, the health of that tree over time. So we want to be really cautious about how we do that. All right, how many of you really love this color mulch? All right, I know there's somebody in here that does. They just don't want to raise their hand because the rest of us will judge them. And we will tell them you are needing of some sort of counseling. Landscapers love this mulch. Why?
Inexpensive.
It is inexpensive. They're putting a lot of mulch out there. Is this bad mulch? Shame on you, this is bad mulch. How about the black mulches or the brown mulches or the blue mulches? There might be green too, I don't know. There's a multicolor bunch of mulches. I haven't seen chartreuse yet, but there's nothing wrong with this mulch. It's maybe a quality mulch. It is likely pallets that have been shipped up into wood chips. It probably is not the best for overall building of soil, right? But it is not necessarily a terrible thing. But here's my point about mulch. Mulch is the underwear of the landscape. We all wear it. Some of us maybe wear boxers, some of us briefs. Doesn't really matter. But when we see seas of mulch, it's like the love affair that we have with turf. We got to have it everywhere, right? Lots of it. The more mulch, the better. Seas of mulch. How about plants instead of just mulch? You guys really did not respond to the whole underwear of the landscape thing. As I was You're all afraid to laugh about people's underwear, aren't you? So it is. Does it need to be seen so much? My argument is no. Let's put plants there. This is like, yeah, we got cute little shrubs everywhere, and we've got a tree in the middle. It's that sea of mulch. Let's minimize that. How about staking? I don't know where the heck they thought this tree was going. It is not going anywhere now. It's not certainly going to fly out of the ground by any means. It's not going to flop over. That tree needed pruning to begin with. How about this? Yeah, you don't use your grandma's hose. Put wire in it. We don't do that. Some people still do it. As long as you get it off pretty quickly, that's great, but sometimes you don't, and that's bad, right? They'll grow that tree. And trees are great. They'll grow right around that stuff until later they fall over. So again, when we're planting, this is one of my favorite places to take pictures of bad planting practices. Don't want to be mean, but look, this baby is serious. This is serious business right here. Yeah, were they told to do that? Absolutely. Somebody wrote a specification that's not very good. Yes, stake the life out of that thing. What are you trying to hold down when you plant a tree? What part of it are you trying to keep in the ground? The root ball, right? Yeah, the top's going to fly around, but you're trying to hold that root ball into the ground. So I'm going to show you this new techniques. This has come out of Ed Gilman's work at the University of Florida. Again, you can Google him, Ed Gilman, G-I-L-M-A-N. He's retired, but he has all kinds of amazing information on that website. I'm going to show you this one right here. It is that easy. It is 2x2 wooden stakes, well, you can call them whatever you want, 2x2 pieces of wood. They're inexpensive. They are untreated. You also use drywall screws to hold them together. Drywall screws will rot. So the beauty of this system is you do not ever have to come back and take them out. I promote this to all the landscapers out there. It is less expensive than any other system out there. Plus, it is holding what we need to hold into the ground in the ground. Now, this was a demo that my students did. I would not normally stake this plant. It doesn't need to be staked. Oftentimes, we stake stuff that does not need to be staked. So the cool thing here is you could mulch over top of some of this and hide it. It'll degrade quickly. It'll turn brown. You won't see it necessarily. So think about that on these street trees that everybody's planting, right? You don't have these big stakes that are outside, usually in the turf. and they're always a hazard, and you're trying to mow around them or weed whack around them, so they're always some kind of hazard. The other cool thing is you can come in and you can cut these right off. Cut these off at ground level, cut these off, and you're done. Get a reciprocating saw, which is always fun, right? And you buy these things, you can buy a bundle of these 2x2s. I don't know, maybe there's a dozen in there for $8. So they're really inexpensive, and it really works to do what you want it to do, is hold the root ball in. Yes, ma'am?
How long would you keep that before you felt like you could take a...
How long would you keep it before you could take it? Yeah, this is the point. You could leave it forever and not ever worry about it. Most of the time you're not going to. So in a year or so, when that plant is established, you can take those cross beams off. And the rest of the stuff's just going to rot in the ground. So great question. Yeah. So again, I would not have necessarily staked this, but if you have a top-heavy plant or you have an evergreen, and certainly bare root plants, a different story, you may have to stake them depending on the size of those. How about water? Here's our watering bag. If you use watering bags, that's awesome. You can also use the Homer buckets, from Home Depot or wherever, 5-gallon buckets with a couple holes in the base. Very easy way to water, a couple per plant, a couple per tree. Just delivering water slowly is the key over time, right? For newly planted plants, you may need to water in the south here a couple times a week. How do you know whether you should water or not? This is what I tell my students all the time. What are these things called? Yes, phalanges, if you want to be really technical, right? Fingers. Put them in the ground and feel it and see if it is wet. If it is wet, you do not need to water. If it is dry, maybe you need to water. You want to get down in there. I recommend for good landscapers to have a soil probe with them. Carry that with them. Stick that baby in the ground and see if the soil is wet or not. That's how you know whether you need to water. Getting people to water correctly, particularly the landscape industry, is very challenging. In the nursery industry as well. Because you'll have people that they water like this, whoosh. Yeah, that's not really watering the plant itself. So really important. And so remember, if this bag never empties, that's a problem. Need to go see to make sure stuff isn't clogged. And the biggest key to success is actually filling it when it needs to be filled. So these are trees in a landscape. These are my buddies, the red maples. These are planted in okay locations. I don't mind that. Now, keep in mind one thing. Trees and turf don't really dig each other. They don't. No matter how much we want everybody to get along, they don't get along very well at all. That's why you need mulch and then maybe plants underneath that tree rather than just turf right up to the tree, right? Because, shade-tolerant turfs are really still not that. They really want more sun. So under the canopy of a tree, if you're trying to grow turf, you're always going to lose. Right? The turf will win maybe under the ground, but the shade will devastate that turf. It will never look like you want it to look. And I tell people that all the time. They really want turf. And I'm like, yeah, you're really not going to get turf. So you can see this turf doesn't look all that great. There's a couple things going on. It's dry. Maybe maybe they didn't fix the soil. But these pictures were taken like this. Click and click. Same landscape, same situation. In competition with turf, no irrigation, turf. Y'all can see there's a very distinctive difference. Which of those plants is going to be providing better benefits, more functionality? Obviously, right? That one right there. So we want to think about that. So how long does it take a plant to establish? What do you think? A tree. So 5 years was a guess? A year? 2? What do you think it depends on? See, that's the awesome thing, like an extension, when people ask us questions, we always say, well, it depends. It depends on things, right? It depends on many things. So, it depends on the size of the plant, right? So, in this part of the world, for a 2-inch caliper tree, we're down in here, so it's about a year. So it's about a year per caliper inch. Of course, everything has to be good. It has to be watered well, the weather's got to be good, has to be planted correctly, has to be the right plant in the right place. All of those things factor into how long it takes. Does that make sense to you guys? So if you put a 5-inch caliper tree in, how long is it going to take? 5 years, as long as everything's good. Right? The problem is if it's not done correctly, how long is it going to take for that to die? A 5-inch caliper tree, it can take 10 years for that to die. And it starts what we call the death spiral. We don't know what's happening, but it's actually declining all the time. Sometimes it takes a long time How many of you guys like live oak? Live oak are a tough plant to plant. You can plant them, but when you first put them in the ground, it takes some time for them to establish. It seems like they start kind of declining a little bit, and then once they catch on, they'll take off. But the bigger live oak you plant, the more challenging your planting is going to be. Is everybody good with that? Y'all good? Hanging in there? That's a beautiful mulch ring. It's boring. That is the underwear. We don't need to see that much boxer shorts, people. Right? It's beautiful. It's not too deep around the top. I don't care. I don't have any big issue with that. It's not too deep. It's not too deep anywhere. It's pretty enough. It does eliminate competition with the turf, right? So as much of it says right here, and this again, research-based information, 8 feet. Most landscapes, they're never going to give you 8 feet of mulch, right? But you can get 4. That's half as good. Okay, so how do you get things, what encourages establishment? Loose soil, as Dr. Fontenot talked about. Soil, right? Proper irrigation management. Notice that's in red because that's a tricky thing to make sure we're doing it right. The root fair planted it, great. Remember, that root, that first main order root just below the soil surface. Yes, ma'am?
That's what I mean. I wasn't sure exactly what the root flare is, and and just to clarify, you said that first root.
That first main order root, that is part of your root flare. So most trees come down, right, and go out. When they get bigger, that root plate is really important to make sure they stay up, right? That's why they get such big buttress roots, to hold those trees up. That's why those roots are so important to be at the surface. You know it's not planted right. If you see something in the landscape and it goes straight down into the ground or straight into a root ball, you wiggle that baby around in that B&B plant, you know that the first main order roots are down there. And as I said, if it's 6 inches below soil, I don't want that tree. I will reject it. 2 to 3 inches, good. You can take that soil off of the top. That doesn't mean I haven't planted some that are a little too deep. You just have to figure you're getting a slightly smaller root ball than you would have if it had been dug at the right depth. And our growers in North Carolina are getting much, much better all the time at digging and planting correctly.
So I'm sorry, when you plant that first root should be 1 inch below, or
that first root should be just below the grade, right? So there's soil on top of it. You don't want it necessarily exposed, but it can be a little exposed. It's not the biggest deal in the world as long as most of the roots are under the soil, but not deeply under the soil. All right? Y'all with that? Y'all get that? Right on. All right. So yeah. So again, that's not mulch. So compacted soil is one of the biggest killers of trees out there. Established trees, establishing trees, it is a huge issue in the landscape. Grass and weeds growing up all around there, that is not good. Too deep or too high, right? Lately I've been seeing too high, way too high. Again, a foot is too high out of the ground. If somebody's dug that, that means they don't want to dig a deep enough hole, okay? Excessive pruning at planting. Notice back here I told you you can prune defects. So in the old days we used to say, don't prune anything, or no, way back when, they'd say prune the top of the tree to match the root ball, where you cut the root ball, prune the top back. Then they said, no, that's not right. Then they said, don't prune anything. Now the general recommendation is if you have a co-dominant leader that's on a shade tree, one of those needs to go right off the bat. Prune that off at planting. And maybe Ted will talk a little bit more about that later. There's a lot of joy juice out there. Bill talked a little bit about the magic joy juice kind of stuff, right? I would classify water-absorbing gels in there. I don't know, I've seen them put in the landscape. Usually they put them in mixes that are in containers. That's very different than putting them in the soil. I've seen people adding them to the planting soil, and it rains. And guess what? It looks like some crazy alien has invaded their yard. Because that stuff bubbles up on out of there. It's like, what the heck is that stuff? Yeah, it's like the thing, right? You don't need to add those if you've planted it correctly and you prepped your soil, as Dr. Fontenot said. Mycorrhizae spores, as he said, build it and they will come, right? Mycorrhizae is a fungal root association. And certain plants have certain mycorrhizae that they like each other a lot. Mycorrhizae actually increases the surface area of roots so it takes up more water. It also has been found to be really important in the uptake of phosphorus. Phosphorus is important in a plant as it all happens because of phosphorus, right? That's very important. Root stimulant products. I see them all over the place. Again, I consider that a little bit of the joy juice. Is it going to hurt the tree? No. But don't do it if you don't need to. If you've prepped the soil well and you're at it and watering it properly, fertilizing it, planting, not necessary, again. And if it's a young plant And the roots are very tender. If you add too much fertilizer, you will burn those babies. So kind of think about that. So the bottom line, a good hole, they always say a $50 hole for a $5 tree. That really is pretty accurate. Make a good hole. You should be able to live in there. A little tiny house. 2 to 3 diameter, right? Now, too, the other thing is, if you have a really poorly drained soil, and I thought I had this in here, and I don't know what happened to that picture. If you have a really poorly drained soil, you can actually dig your hole and then put a mound in the middle of your hole, a compacted mound of soil, and set your root ball on that. Remember, it still has to be the right depth, so you might have to dig your hole deeper to get that mound. So the whole point is you're like creating a moat, right? You got your ball, you got your mound, you got your hole, you got this big mound, you're setting your root ball on it, and now the water can collect below there a little bit and not really impact the plant itself. So lots of cool different ways to kind of think about that. I thought I put a picture in here. I don't know what happened to it. Again, don't compact the soil when you put it in there. Kind of defeats the purpose of digging a 2 to 3 times diameter root ball hole, right? Doesn't make any sense to go back in there and compact the heck out of it. And plants are very resistant. And it's, everybody says, horticulture is not rocket science. And I would say, I'm glad, number one. Rocket science, to me, is all about mathematical equations. Horticulture is a lot more complex because you're dealing with living things that you're trying to grow. And there's so many things that can go wrong and so many things that can go right. And usually when I'm called out to look at plants that have a problem, it is not just one problem. It is usually a suite of issues that cause that plant problems. So really doing it correctly from the get-go is very, very important because you will have a plant that is much healthier in the long run and better off. So with that, thank you guys very much. There's my contact information. You are welcome to email me at any time to ask any kind of questions y'all want. I don't know. What's our time situation there, Chris?
Clock's right there.
Yeah, we got some time for some questions if anybody has.
Got 5 minutes, it looks like. Yes, ma'am.
I live near a stream and I have a lot of water. That when we have a lot of water, there can be runoff. And I've noticed that the roots have come up into the lawn. And I wanted to know, I know that soil gets very compacted because of all the water. I thought of putting, I know you're not supposed to cover roots because those roots are coming up because they're trying to get out of the water. What would be the best way to correct that situation?
So the question has to do with she has trees and plants near a stream. It's very wet. She's noticed that the roots are coming up to the surface, certainly back into the turf grass area. So in general, yes, they don't recommend putting soil on top of roots. Number one, in a site like that, it's probably a lost cause to try to keep doing that. I'm just being honest with you. But if you're and if it's a sloped area, you're really out of luck to try to put soil on top of there and keep it in place, right? So yeah, roots need oxygen, right? And water, but that's why roots kind of tend to be in the top surface. So the most of the root systems of a tree are in the top 6 inches of the soil. That's where those fibrous roots are, because that's where the oxygen and nutrients and water are most often, right? So when you have a site where maybe you have a tree that all the roots are coming to the surface, maybe some of it is erosion, some of the soil has been lost, and maybe there's some species like maples that really just form those kind of surface roots. So you can add soil to those situations over time, but you can't do it all at once. Usually you're talking a couple of inches of very light, loamy soil on top of that root system. You're not compacting it in. But that's why I was saying you could also bring in an arborist that does have an air spade that can actually come in and incorporate organic matter and topsoil kind of in with those roots of that plant to raise the level. And obviously if you're doing that, you're minimizing compaction and suffocation of the roots. Some cases it is not, I can't give you an easy fix. For what your situation sounds like, there's probably not an easy fix. Keep in mind, though, that those roots are holding the soil in place. That's really important, too, to minimize erosion into your stream. So, yeah. Did I see somebody else over here? Yeah?
So I have 2 very mature pecan trees,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing wants to live under there. Do you have thoughts like just...
Right. 2 very mature pecan trees, and nothing wants to live under there.
Well, certainly not
Do pecans have an allelopathic effect? Yeah, certainly not grass. Again, sometimes things just don't get along. Do they? I don't know if they do. I'm not aware that they do have an allelopathic, because some trees will produce, like black walnut, right? Will produce a chemistry in the soil that actually can kill other plants. I'm not aware with that. I'm not aware with it with pecans. So I would say you could actually, again, if you can build some soil over time over top of those roots, you should be able to try some understory plants. So, you know, depending on how much shade it is, how dense the canopies are, you could go to azaleas. Like if you do that air spade, you can see where the roots are. You can pop big plants into some of those holes. So you could have an immediate impact right away. So you might try, you know, certainly some native shade plants. Clethra is a great shade plant for wet areas. Epimedium is a herbaceous plant, great for dry shade. So trying some of those, I would try maybe some small herbaceous stuff to start with, see how it does. If you want to, you know, kind of experiment with some other things over time, that would certainly work. So yeah, it's not, again, you think about what grows out in the woods together and see what works for you. That's the best I got for you. Yes, ma'am.
I stepped on the soil after I planted.
OMG, she stepped on the soil. That tree is dead. It's all she
the picture.
Yeah, just like the picture, huh?
A few months ago, so would it help if I got like a pitchfork and gently tried to loosen the soil?
Sure, only a few months ago, yeah.
Yeah.
So she said she kind of compacted things a little bit, right? Still can be your friend, it's all right. But yeah, you're going to go in, you can go in and you can till that up a little bit, right? I mean, obviously, you know, a lot of people want to go in and till stuff up underneath trees, right? To get grass to grow better or whatever we do. Whenever you do that, you're killing roots. And you can kill trees doing that. The roots, remember, top 3 inches, top 6 inches. If you're in there with a tiller, you're tilling up every single one of those. Not only that, it's very hard on your tiller to get those big buttress roots. Again, if you're trying to grow grass, right, you're going to beat the heck out of your lawnmower. So we don't want to do that. Yeah, ma'am.
What do you do with roots growing across your driveway and cracking your driveway?
The roots of these darn trees, right? Get rid of them. So she asked, what do you do with roots growing and cracking your driveway? Well, you might have to go in and cut that root from where it is growing, right, to that driveway edge. Depends on how big it is, how far away from the where the main trunk of that tree is. You can impact about 30% of the root system of an established healthy tree without killing it, like going in and cutting some roots if you have to. So if you have to cut just a few roots, you can do that. You want to make clean cuts. The deal, though, is if it's a healthy, good tree, you are still going to eventually have a problem there, right? So you think about trees and sidewalks, right? Everybody wants to blame the trees. Well, they're pretty powerful. That's, you know, big roots, a lot of power. That's why they move through the soil the way they do. But so how do we build, often driveways maybe are the same way, but how do we build sidewalks? How much gravel you got underneath there? I don't know, maybe 3 to 6 inches, depending, right? So you have a compacted surface, you have gravel, and then we put on what? Maybe 3 inches of concrete. And then we do what? We have a square piece that has these expansion joints in them. What are those expansion joints for? So the concrete can move with the freezing and thawing of the soil. The roots are like, woo! Happy day, right? They can get under there and they can move that sidewalk because guess what? There is water, there is oxygen down there in that gravel. Now they got room to move up and down. So it is like a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Did the trees do it? Of course the engineers want to say the trees did it. You ever seen trees growing under a roadway that's this big, this deep? No, right? Do they grow on the edge of the curb? Absolutely. Are they going to uplift the sidewalk? Absolutely. So, I'm sorry, there's not a lot of things I can tell you because if that tree keeps growing, you will still have that battle. But you can go in and selectively do some root pruning. There are root barriers and stuff out there. Some roots are so great that they can grow up over top of those things. So there's certainly, bring an arborist in. If it's a big, significant tree in your landscape, bring an arborist in to help you. Certified arborist. You had a question?
Yes, you know, the hurricane season just passed. We have these very big old trees and things fall down. And one point is I was amazed at some of them that the roots weren't bigger. You know, that the reporter said, wow, look at all these big roots. But really, the size of the tree, I didn't think the roots were that big.
Right.
I don't know
So she's making the point that after the hurricane, many trees blew down, right? And I know of in many parts of the state where they had a lot of hurricane damage, there also were people that came behind. They called themselves tree people, right? I would call them, what is it? Scavengers. What's the other word? Scammers. There's another word I'm looking for. Bottom feeders? Okay, these are all great things. Carpetbaggers. I'm actually thinking of, after a town is deserted or something, who are those people that go in and steal? Looters. That's what I'm looking for. Looters. Those people are coming in and preying on everybody's fears. So they come in and they say, hey, that tree is going to fall. You need to come in and you need to take it down. It's dangerous. Right? There's no way that they know that. Number one, they don't know what the heck they're talking about. They have a chainsaw and a truck. Right? And they are trying to make money and trying to make money fast. And I'm not saying everybody does that, because there are really good tree companies that go down to those areas to help people, not to steal money from them. So we're in urban forestry business, we're very concerned about that, because people want to come in because they're naturally afraid. I'm not saying that's not right to be afraid, because we have these big trees. And like you're pointing out, if you've ever seen a tree that's fallen over, you get what I'm saying about how deep the root system is of a mature tree. That root plate may only look like it's this big. You might have big buttress roots. It just depends on the tree's health and overall how its growing conditions would be, how big those roots might be. So some people might be surprised, like, whoa, those aren't as big as I thought they would be. But they go out a long ways. So remember, you got your tree here. Roots can go 2 to 3 times out from the drip line of that tree. They can go as far as they can go and grow. They're going to grow that way. They're just not going to necessarily go down, because that's not where the good stuff is. So it is really hard to predict, but that's when, again, you bring in an arborist, somebody who can come in and look at your trees and give you an assessment. Obviously, when trees are in standing water for a significant period of time, that is really hard on many species, but it's a species by species assessment, a plant by plant assessment. Because oftentimes what happens, we've already had a really dry period, right? Potentially we've had a serious drought with a lot of heat. And then we get a storm where a lot of water. So those plants are potentially already under some stress. So then you add this saturation to them. And anytime you're saturating the soil, even on a healthy, mature tree, doesn't mean they won't come down. Because that soil that's wet is essentially now soft, and it has moved away from the root system of that plant, right? So it's not as stable. So there are reasons to certainly be cautious and concerned, but to just willy-nilly, as I would call it, take plants down, to me is sad. We need to think about it a little bit more before we just do that. So, because trees are pretty important, as I told you. So.
Seems like a good place for us to stop.
Thanks, guys.